Welcome to the latest Gramophone podcast. I'm Martin Cullingford, editor of Gramophone. And today I'm delighted to be joined by the new, I think we can still say that, newish principal conductor of the Hallé Orchestra, Kahchun Wong. Kahchun, hello.
Thank you for having me.
Now, there are two areas I'd really love to explore with you today. One is the wonderful new recording of Bruckner's Ninth Symphony that you have just released on the Hallé's own label. And the second is how your relationship with this superb Manchester-based ensemble is going, discoveries, achievements, and of course, plans related to that. So in fact, let's set the scene with that latter topic. You took up your post in September, and while this is a second album, and the first Britten's Prince of the Pagodas was very well received in our pages late last year, and I thoroughly enjoyed that, it's still a new partnership. So how did it come about? How did you first encounter the Halle? And then what's it like to become in charge of such an orchestra?
Well, the Halle has been world renowned since I was growing up in Singapore. These recordings with Bobby Rolli and then with Sir Mark Elder have been resources which I've grown up with. And I think I was supposed to go to the Halle already sometime in the early 2020s. But of course, we had COVID, and that sort of first encounter, that debut, if you would, was delayed for a season and then another season. And finally, I was able to perform with the orchestra. And I had absolutely no expectation because it was a first meeting. And within the first break of the first rehearsal, I thought something was going on, because then my manager gave me a call and said, "What did you do?" And I said, "I didn't know." And it seemed like there was a really positive vibe. I felt that from the orchestra. I think it was very mutual, that there was just some special chemistry going on. And then I realized that the orchestra has been searching for a successor to Mark for some time. And so it's one of those things where everything just came together very quickly. I was very skeptical. I was thinking, okay, it's just one rehearsal. Let's wait for the concert. And then after the concert, I was thinking, it's just one concert. We need a few more get-togethers before we confirm a relationship. But the Halle has been always very positive, and one thing quickly led to the other, and then here I was at the start of my season, my first season with the orchestra last September.
Yeah. It's quite an extraordinary thing, isn't it? You obviously conduct a lot of orchestras. The Halle will work with a lot of conductors, and yet something just felt right. They sensed, you sensed a real chemistry. I mean, can you almost define what that is? What is different about working with them to lots of other orchestras, for example?
I mean, every orchestra is different. I think every orchestra is a good orchestra, but every orchestra is a different one in terms of character, in terms of shared experience. I think the fact that the Halle has spent so much time with Mark, who's such a serious musician, who's so thoughtful, and he's got really deep understanding of music. I think that character was propagated, was transmitted through the musicians of the Halle as well. And so, I'm a serious musician myself. I don't joke around a lot. I like to be very curious, and I like to work very, very hard. And I think I came across an orchestra who really valued these values as well, if I may. I like that we are always working very hard until the last moments, and the orchestra as well, just fine-tuning everything. And then in concert, it's completely different from our rehearsals, and we hear it all the time because we've already had a few recordings or a few recording experiences, and the concert just sounds very different. It's almost quite impossible to have patching of our concerts from dress rehearsals or from earlier rehearsals, just because the orchestra sounds so different. And it's quite remarkable how, again, I think this is that love at first sight, that kind of chemistry that just clicked together. And I'm very, being the skeptic that I am, I'm wondering how long this honeymoon period would last. But it seems like I've been assured by my very trusted colleagues that, these things can last for years. So I'm very looking much forward to that.
Yeah, well, I mean, certainly the strength of their relationship with Sir Mark Elder lasted for years. And during that period of time, he's obviously developed and worked and created a really wonderful ensemble, focusing on a lot of repertoire, including things which are very sort of core to the Halle's heritage and tradition. Lots of Elgar, Vaughan Williams, also Wagner. And tell me about your impressions of the orchestra. You described earlier being aware of them and of their work with Barbaroli, but what memories and images did you bring to the orchestra when you first arrived at them? I mean, you were telling me earlier about playing in a wind band, and obviously the tradition of that in the north of England, in that culture, is very important.
I'm Singaporean. I grew up in Singapore, and so we've gone through the whole GCSE system, O levels, A levels. And in primary school, we all had to join a club. And so one day, my mathematics teacher, who was also the in charge for the brass band, just gave all of us students a consent forms. The form was for our parents to sign, to say on Saturdays we allow our children to go to school. And I didn't know what I was doing, but I then was handed the cornet. I was tiny, my fingers were tiny, I could make a sound, I could buzz on the mouthpiece, and so I became a cornet player. And so that began my first relationships with brass band, with music. We played a lot of Philip Spark. He was one of the important composers of brass band music. And then in secondary school, I came across Malcolm Arnold's Peterloo Overture, which for a version for wind orchestra. But it was one of those really, really moving pieces. And then I realized fairly recently how close by, how connected the Halle's history was with this, because 1819, the Free Trade Hall, St. Peter's Square, which is just a stone throws away from the Bridgewater Hall, the working class in Manchester, the Industrial Revolution. I mean, everything just came together. And then I very recently appreciated how close history was, and a part of history which was connected to me through Malcolm Arnold's music when I was in my teens. So that was something very special. It all came together in a very brilliant way.
And the Halle's always struck me as an orchestra that feels very rooted in its city, historically, as you've just described, but also culturally. It feels very much like a beacon within the city, and of course historically it would perform in the industrial areas around Manchester, with figures like Kathleen Ferrier joining choral societies and the Halle, and it's not one of these orchestras in a city which is sort of, it could be in any city. It feels very much like a Manchester institution. Is that something you've got a sense of?
I think that must be one of the strongest attractions of the Halle that made me so interested to be together, to explore a long-term partnership. The orchestra, the Hallé Orchestra, has always been a community orchestra. It's always connected with, would you say, blue-collared workers? They were going into the cotton mills, making music for blue-collared workers. There was nothing snooty about this. This was not an orchestra for the elite or for the very well-to-do in society. And I really like this approach, it still remains very much grounded as a community orchestra, as one of the best orchestras around, but a community orchestra. And education, I mean, the amount of work, we call it outreach, but I think it's more than outreach. I think rather than saying it's outreach, it's inreach, isn't it? So we're just inside the whole city and part of Greater Manchester. And I think it stands from, I don't know, 1819 or 1858. I think 1858, that was the founding of the orchestra. From then until now, I don't think the principles of the orchestra has changed much.
Right. And for those who don't know Manchester and the orchestra in person, your two main performance spaces are one, the Bridgewater Hall, really quite extraordinary hall, which was one of the first sort of big modern buildings in the regeneration of the dock areas, and then more recently the conversion in Ancoats, another post-industrial area of this extraordinary building, St. Peter's, the church in again another part of the city, which is feeling like it's having a renaissance. I mean, that must really help with that sense of identity with the city.
It's very exciting. And codes with Hallé St. Peter's, with this church that is now converted into our space, where we've also made recordings in, is really part of a tradition where you get very high quality Italian food, because there was this whole Italian presence from the Industrial Revolution. Cotton mills all around Ancoats, and yet we've got classical music there. It's now one of the very hip places to be. A lot of bars and drinking places and restaurants. And then we've got Bridgewater Hall, which is sort of at the edge. It looks like it's at the edge of the city, but everything is walkable. So from Bridgewater Hall to Hallé St. Peter's, it's maybe 20 minutes by foot. It just feels like it's an integral part of Manchester, and I was very taken aback in a very positive way a year ago, because we were all, well, in 2023, at the end of the year of 2023, Manchester led a delegation to Osaka, to Japan, and I also have another orchestra in Tokyo, that's the Japan Philharmonic, and so there was this delegation of Mancunians that were in my rehearsal, and some of them at my concert. But the fact that the Halle and Man City, the Manchester City Football Club, two sort of treasures of Greater Manchester, and this was mentioned at the British Embassy. This was mentioned by our mayor, by Andy Burnham, was something that was very striking, because usually the symphony orchestra is an afterthought. It serves a very niche audience and a very niche demographics, but yet it's brought up together in the same sentence as Man City, as part of Greater Manchester. That just made me realize how important a function we are as an orchestra, as a community orchestra of the highest caliber. And I'm very much devoted and fired up to carry on this tradition that Sir Mark has so very beautifully developed.
That's really wonderful to hear. And before we come on to talk about repertoire, talking about traditions that Sir Mark has developed, taking over an orchestra is a fascinating thing, because when appointing a new conductor, no orchestra wants someone to do the same. There's no point in doing that. They want a new person with their own vision. But obviously, you're working with an orchestra that's got a particular sound and style. Is it possible to sort of define what it means to make the orchestra now your orchestra, or is that something that just happens more automatically by a process of working together and learning together?
Well, I've had a limited experience as a chief conductor, as a music director. I had spent a few years in Nuremberg. That was my first position, and then I'm now very happy in Japan and also with the Halle. So the Halle is really my third orchestra, which is overlapping with my second orchestra. So I can't say that I've got a lot of experience in making an orchestra my orchestra. I must say that I've never come from this perspective that an orchestra must belong to a conductor. I think that's just simply arrogance, and there's a kind of boundary. It sets a kind of boundary that limits the possibilities of an orchestra. And again, I come from Singapore, where classical music is something foreign. It's not part of our culture, but it's something where if we like it, we really appreciate it for what it is, for its rituals, for the values it brings, the wisdom it brings to humanity. And so coming to the Halle, I see an orchestra which is very healthy, of course, because of the good work from Sir Mark, and also actually I must add David Butcher, our CE, who has done so much. The atmosphere in the orchestra is just truly positive. The vibes, I mean, good vibes. If you would in the term of today, you feel that in the orchestra. People are happy coming to work, or at least that's what I feel. I'm happy coming to work, and the sound of the orchestra is something very special. That is something which I think we need to look into. The sound of the strings, which have a kind of, I spent a lot of time in Germany. It has that kind of German weight to it, but with a kind of flexibility and maneuverability in which any conductor that stands in front of them, they would react instantly with that kind of, if you may, British sight reading, British adaptability to that. And so I think this is the strength of the Halle. And then you've got players like, we've got really, really good wind players, brass players. You've got Gareth, who comes from the British brass band, this northern brass band tradition. We just played Mahler 2, and in Urlicht, you've got that brass chorale at the start. And I asked very, very politely, Gareth, would you consider playing that as if you were playing on a cornet? So that whole da 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 da. Would you think of that as a very cornety passage? And he just smiled. And the next time we played this, he had this very beautiful vibrato. I mean, Mahler, Urlicht, you would think, yeah, we play on these rotary big trumpets and no vibrato, it has to be dark. And I used to play trumpet, so I can speak from some sort of little experience. And Gareth was just doing something magical. And I think this kinds of flexibility you can only find in very limited places. And I think the Halle is one of them.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, the Halle has a tradition of Mahler. That's quite a relationship. But the first recording that we heard from you in the autumn last year was a delightful surprise, Britten's Prince of the Pagodas. It's not a work of Britten's that we hear as much as his operas, for example, and there aren't many recordings of it, but it was really wonderful. Why did you choose that particular work? And I have to say, I thought it was a glorious demonstration of the colours of the orchestra, because it's such an exquisite score.
Thank you very much. I must admit that this was a really successful choice, and it came together after a lot of discussion together with everyone. I mean, the whole team was involved. We knew that there was a recording patch available at Halle St. Peter's. It's a very nice church. It's not super big. It's not the Bridgewater Hall, and so doing a studio recording in this space would have its limits. So we were thinking of all sorts of possibilities. Bruckner Symphony could be one of those, because there was the Bruckner year last year, and we could have released it as part of the Bruckner sort of celebration. We could do a Mahler Symphony. We could do Brahms. We could do. There are a lot of pieces that we were all exploring, but it just didn't. A Bruckner Symphony needed some space. We needed a natural acoustic to carry that sound. The same could be said for a Mahler, for example. We could do Brahms. We could do, I don't know, a Beethoven Symphony, but we all sort of were thinking, yeah, that could work. And then we all went home. We had a few meetings. We all went home after a few meetings, never really satisfied. And one day, someone just said, oh, what about some Britten? And we know that David, our CE, used to be part of the Britten Symphonia, and he was giving a lot of ideas. And then suddenly I thought, oh, Britten. There's this one work, I forgot the name to it. I studied it because I was a composition student in my undergrad years in Singapore. There was gamelan involved. Britten spent some time was it in Java or was it in Bali? I wasn't sure. But I remembered hearing something from Britten as part of my own composition studies. And then very quickly, David was like, oh, Opera, Britten, Prince of Pagodas, let's set something up. Colin Matthews, who was a disciple of Britten and a great composer in his own right. And so that moved very quickly. I was introduced to opera. I spent a few nights living on the estate itself, in the estate, and going to the library, going through all sorts of manuscripts of Britten, the Prince of Pagodas, as well as the War Requiem and everything else. Suddenly, within a span of a few months, I became very, very immersed in the music of Britten, and I really didn't know much of him. Very embarrassed to say that. And then we decided it would have to be the Prince of Pagodas, because we've got the UK, we've got England, the best of England, we've got Asian music, Southeast Asian music involved. So this was not just Chinese or Japan or Korean. I mean, they were East Asian, but Asia is huge, and I come from a very specific part of Southeast Asia. And me having spent a lot of time during my vacation going to Bali or Bandung for holidays and listening to gamelan or kulintang. Kulintang is Filipino, but what's that? We've got the other type of Javanese, Sundanese gamelan, which is different from Balinese gamelan, and it just felt like the right way to profile our first project together. And so Britten it was.
Absolutely. But now here we are with Bruckner 9, Bruckner's Ninth Symphony, a very different sort of work, and one you said you'd been considering anyway at the beginning. Now, in the booklet notes for this album, you write very personally about why you feel so close to Bruckner's music, and in terms of aligning it with values you grew up with: self-restraint, patience, harmony, a reverence for structure and for spirituality. Can you expand on that? Because I found that those notes really rather moving.
Well, I must also admit, I never really thought in this line until then. I have a very, very close friend who is the principal trumpet of the Japan Philharmonic. He's Italian, and he's a really good player. And in his own words, he was saying that, because we had a very, very successful Bruckner ninth performance in Japan as well. And so he came up to have a post concert drink together, and he thought that, oh, if this was in Italy, it would have been very different results. And I thought, so yeah, that's true, because it's Japan, where in Japan there's a reverence for discipline, for patience, delayed gratification, harmony, or just groupthink, or just being very careful about what everyone else is doing and structuring our progress in the same way as everyone else. Now that sounds very much like it would work very well for Bruckner. I mean, for other pieces of music where you need that kind of spontaneity in certain types of very flamboyant opera, for example, you would imagine that a Japanese orchestra would react very differently. It could be good, but it would be very different from an Italian orchestra. And that set me really thinking, and this is really just some months ago, it's very recent, half a year ago, that yeah, that's right. I mean, why do a lot of us in Asia have such a fascination for Bruckner? A lot of my friends, a lot of my very young friends find it very difficult to listen to Bruckner, because it's one of those composers where you probably need to be 60 years old before you have that patience, or that be that relaxed to appreciate his music, because everything sounds the same. And to me, I was thinking, no, actually everything is so different. There's little differences, but those differences make all the variety. And then I thought maybe it's really got to do with temperament, and the temperament of a certain type of people. And of course, there are exceptions. I'm trying to be very careful that I'm not generalizing any of this. But I think there's really something special going on between the music of Bruckner and myself, for example, where, you want that kind of inner strength, that kind of solitude, but with all sorts of fragility, all sorts of questions that I have. I mean, I'm deeply troubled with myself, with the world, and I think with Bruckner he had that kind of troubles, and he turned to religion and his music as a form of catharsis, and I think that's exactly what I and a lot of us in Asia feel too.
Yeah, I mean, listening to a Bruckner symphony is a journey of, as you say, patience, of repetition, sometimes a sort of almost a meditative sense, leading to a form of transcendence, which feels like it could only have been created by what has come before. So let's set the scene of the symphony. It was premiered in 1903 after Bruckner had died, written over the period of time of almost a decade, during which he was revising earlier works and also dealing with ill health, and then left unfinished. And we'll come on to talk about the fourth movement. But there's always lots of complexity when exploring Bruckner symphonies in terms of revisions and which editions we use. So talk to me a little bit about the score you've decided to conduct from.
Well, the Ninth Symphony has always existed in at least three movement, sort of incomplete version. I think for very good reason, because it's such a nice, you've got the Holy Trinity, you've got three movements, you've got this massive first movement, this massive third movement with a sort of scherzo trio, a 10-minute tiny little thing for Bruckner in between. So you've got this nice form. And the way the third movement ends is ethereal, it's perfect. And, I've performed this exact version before we went to the Halle. And this was with the Japan Philharmonic. And as you would imagine, in Japan, everyone is very, very traditional. It just so happened that over the same weekend that we were performing Bruckner 9 with the Japan Philharmonic, 2 other orchestras were performing 7 and 8. So this was like a very impromptu, completely uncoordinated Bruckner festival, a mini festival, of sorts. And I was thinking, we're going to play this with the Halle, so let's do the finale. And I had a lot of feedback, very positive, very useful, constructive feedback from the orchestra, from the Japan Philharmonic, saying, because it's such a big thing for us, it's Bruckner's anniversary this year, we want to stick to custom. Let's give the best Bruckner 9 of our lives according to custom, according to what the audience would like to have. Because otherwise we would have to think of all sorts of creative solutions. We could have a break after the third movement and then come back for the fourth movement so that audience who would find it completely sufficient to end with the third movement can take their leave. And there was sort of almost a kind of projection that we think at least half the audience would go home or would find it completely satisfying, completely enough just to have the 3-movement version. And so we decided, let's just play the 3-movement version. I mean, there wasn't, it wasn't life or death that we must have the 4th-movement version, the 4-movement version. And what a performance that was. I mean, the orchestra gave everything, we gave everything. The audience was so quiet. We had 2-3 minutes of silence at the end of the 3rd movement. And really, there was no feeling that there was an extra note necessary in this whole performance. It was as it is. So one could say that this is divine intervention. At some point we know, that Bruckner always likes to have his finale. His finales are always grand, and it's always a nice glimpse of the Almighty. And he intended for it to be that way. He was suggesting the Te Deum as a substitute if for some reason he wasn't able to complete his own finale of the 9th. But divine intervention came in the form of for some reason for the last 50 years or more, the whole canon of classical music decided that it was just a 3-movement version that was completely necessary. And then a few weeks later, I had this opportunity to perform the full version with a revised finale, a revision based on the SPCM version that was recorded by Sir Simon and the Berliners in 2013, 12 or 13. It's been, I think, about 12 years ago. And so now we've got an updated revision by one of the 4, one of the SPCM Mr. P, Dr. Phillips, who set it upon himself to continue upgrading or revising that version, if we may. And so we've performed that in concert. And again, it felt like it was absolutely necessary that after the 3rd movement, we really needed, it was inevitable that we needed a grand finale from purgatory into transcendence, and that was the function of the finale. And so within a span of, 3 weeks, or a month, I had 2 completely different experiences. One with just a 3-movement version in Japan, and one with the 4-movement version. And I cannot today tell you which is my better preferred version.
What I think is fascinating there is that both can be a preferred version, and I think, as you put it, that you can perform the 3-movement version. It can feel complete. It can feel like all there needs to be, and you can do the 4th movement version, and it also feels complete, as if that's being meant. And obviously, Bruckner, I think there's something like 500 pages of manuscript for the 4th movement, of which the entire symphony is there's only 1,100 pages of. So he clearly wanted something there, and yet it can feel. And you're not the only conductor who said that. They said 3 can feel perfect, but 4 can feel perfect too, and it's such an interesting thing.
Yeah, exactly.
And just the sound world, there's so much in there in terms of almost sort of pioneering harmonic development, structural development. We're in the sound world of Wagner, but also Mahler too, and just Bruckner's distinctive pushing forward. It's such an extraordinary work.
Yeah, it's really. I'm starting to sort of recall those experiences, and I'm still getting moved just thinking back of about those times we've spent together. I think. I mean, one of the concerns is that whenever you've got a recording with the fourth movement out, and everyone goes to get fourth movement as the crux of the whole recording. But I see that very differently. I mean, the first 3 movements are absolutely magical, and the fourth is sort of. I mean, I don't want to trivialize this, but it's that tiramisu to end off your first, second, third courses, whatever they might be. It's part of a whole journey, and we really took great lengths to ensure that we tried to keep to the whole narrative as a whole. I mean, if this was Lord of the Rings, this isn't just the Return of the King. This needed the Fellowship, and this needed Two Towers, and it needed a real sense of adventure, of tension, and of serendipity from the first to the last movement. And we were very lucky because our leader just happened to be available for that week where I was performing the 3-movement version in Japan. And so we were very lucky to have invited Robbie, our leader, to be a guest concertmaster in Japan. So we've gone through the 3-movement version together, and we've now gone through the 4-movement version together. And so I think we are onto something in the right. We're onto something okay, and we'll see what happens when the disc gets released.
Well, absolutely. Well, I thoroughly enjoyed it. So just a reminder that Kahchun Wong and the Hallé's new recording of Bruckner's Symphony No. 9 is available from the orchestra's own label. Kahchun Wong, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you. It's such a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to this Gramophone podcast. If you've enjoyed it, please do search for Gramophone wherever you find your podcasts. We have hundreds more episodes featuring leading artists to download and enjoy. And do subscribe for free to future episodes. And if you can, please leave us a rating or a review. It really helps others to discover our work. And speaking of subscribing, Gramophone magazine is published every month in print and online and is packed full of reviews and features about the latest classical music releases. And all listeners to this podcast can get a 20% discount off any subscription package. Simply visit gramophone.co.uk/subscribe and enter the code podcast20 in the checkout. And do join us again next week for another Gramophone podcast.